Hey, I'm Kristen Wilkerson. Thanks for joining us today. I've got a couple friends with me. We're going to talk a little bit about nabbing. I love. We're going to talk a little bit about navigating transitions. And I've got Beth with me. I've got Jasmine with me. Thanks for joining us today.
Grateful to be here
on this platform.
Excited.
And we're going to talk a little bit about it. So, Jasmine and Beth have both kind of been in seasons of transition most recently and then kind of starting one.
Yeah.
And so why don't you just tell us where you are, what's going on in your life, give us the tea.
Yeah.
Okay, transition.
Sips tea, right? Well, I'll start. So, there's been a lot of transitions that have happened in life, but this one is probably one of the most major ones. And I'll say the reason why is because I just got married last April. So April 29th in 2022, my now husband and I tied the knot, and we just committed to what God wanted us to do. I mean, I think we all have plans on like what we want these
Yeah.
seasons to like look like,
Right.
and I definitely didn't expect it to be one
Yeah.
where I moved to New York.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and I grew up in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And so I was always like a fan of like, I'm not leaving Maryland. Like, this is perfect for me, like
Right.
family, life,
Right.
and everything. Had a
Yeah.
plan. But God had something better.
Yeah.
And last April, my husband and I, after we tied a knot on May 15th, we moved to New York.
Come on.
And we got our first place together. And oh, was it a joy-filled moment of overwhelm? Let me just put it like that. It was just such a journey. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that
Yeah.
particular moment. Beth, what about you?
I am starting a new season of
I
transition.
could cry on
Tears.
this.
We both could cry.
Yeah.
Cheers coming. And yeah, I kind of actually like don't know exactly where I'm landing next in the
Yeah.
short term, but
Yeah.
kind of in the long term, by hopefully fall, I'll be in the UK in London. So big city and
Wow.
country change,
So
which is really
excited.
exciting.
Yeah.
And really a career change, a life change,
Yeah.
relationship growing,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm really excited for it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's fill everybody in a little bit. So Beth has been on our church staff.
Yeah.
Well, you've been a part of our church since we started. I mean,
Yeah.
she's a day one girl at Trinity,
yeah,
New York. She was at our first interest meeting. So that's about as day one
Wow.
as it gets, you know?
Yeah.
And it was really cool. Actually, you had been in transition towards the end of your career at
Yeah.
the YMCA
Yep.
and felt a call to ministry.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool season of really watching Beth say yes to Jesus,
Yeah.
say yes to discipleship, but then started to feel this tug for like, I feel like I'm supposed to build the church.
Yeah.
And you kind of retired from the YMCA and started a whole new career,
Yes.
calling, right?
Yeah.
And now she's in a new season where you just turned 40,
Yep.
right? Fourth floor.
Yep.
And you're in a serious relationship.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
with that, as many of us know, comes transition. You
Yeah.
know, and you no longer make decisions just for yourself.
Yeah.
You start making decisions about your future with someone else.
Yeah.
You know, and so
Yeah.
it's very exciting.
Yeah.
I think for both of you, exciting transitions.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's be honest, all transition is hard.
Yeah.
It's all hard. I was talking to somebody about it recently, and I was thinking about how there's this joy, but
Mhm.
there's also a grief. And I think
That's so
people
good.
underestimate the grieving
Yeah.
in transition. And oftentimes we just kind of plow through it, you know,
Yeah,
like,
that's so
oh, if I
good.
can just make it through, like, and we're kind of numb, you know, to what's really happening around us. But
Yeah.
then I remember when I got married, I was so excited to be married.
Yeah.
But then I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
I'm married forever. And there's like a grieving period of
Yeah, that's so
I'm
good.
so, like, it's not about like, oh my gosh, there's so many things in me that are dead, but it's like, yeah, like you don't live for yourself anymore.
Yeah.
You don't just consult
Yeah.
yourself. You
Yeah.
have to live a whole different way. And so maybe
Exactly.
talk about just navigating that. I think maybe you, Jasmine,
Yeah.
because you just got married
Yeah.
and then that transition with moving. So talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
PK, I think you hit something that was like major. I'm like Holy Spirit, that was what it was.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I moved, I remember like before, I was like completely petrified.
Mhm.
I'm like, God, I don't know if I'm going to make friends. I don't know if I'm going to find my favorite Trader Joe's, or like, where am I going
It's
to
a
go
real
get
problem.
gas? And like, what if the gas station, I don't like where it's at? Or how are we going to find our apartment? And what
Yeah.
is that going to look like? And
Yeah.
I think that's something in that entire journey of that transition within that first like 6 months, I was trying to figure out how to be a wife.
Yeah.
What does that look like? I'm like,
Yeah.
I had this vision in my mind of like what a wife was supposed to look like. And I was holding
Mhm.
myself to this major high standard that actually was
Yes.
impossible.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm gonna cook every day. I'm gonna clean every day. I'm gonna make sure I can work on my business and do all different things.
Yeah.
And it was just unrealistic. And so prior to me getting married, I had that freedom of like, I can clean when I want. I can
Yeah.
cook when I want. I can do all these different things. And it's like in that transition period, I started to grieve what it was like to be single. And I didn't actually know what that meant. And it wasn't necessarily like I missed dating or anything like that.
Right.
It was more of the fact that like I was independent. I remember James and I first moved in and we have this large TV that's there, and I go to pick the TV up, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "What? I can move the TV." And he's like, "No, like I'm right here." And so I think even those little small moments, you're realizing how much, number one, that you have to surrender to God in the transition,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's the grief because you're literally RIPing your past.
That's it.
Yeah.
And you're walking into a new future where it's not just you, but it's a new person that is involved and that can help you and
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
say like what you're doing actually is stressing you out because you're living your
So true.
life so fast by yourself that
Yeah.
you just don't recognize the fact that you're grieving a process that is so comfortable for you and it's so easy for you
Yeah.
and it feels easier, but then this lovely person comes along, my
Yeah.
incredible husband, and he
Mhm.
shows me and he tells me like, hey, like no,
really
slow
good.
down on this part.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you didn't eat breakfast this morning. I'm like, no. And you just keep going and you learn how to
Yes.
forgive yourself for some of the things that you didn't know you were like living crazily in.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, it's
learning
great.
how to live better in the
Yeah.
new season that you're in while you're
Yeah.
transitioning.
Yeah, I like that you said like R.I.P.
Yeah.
the old me.
Yeah.
And that is it. You kind
Yeah.
of have to come like
Yeah.
to peace. Where it's like
Exactly.
that's different and that's gone and
Yeah.
that's never coming back.
No.
And
Yeah.
that's okay. That's
Yeah.
something we celebrate, but it's okay to also feel like, hey, that's actually really hard at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about for you, Beth? Like in this transition, how have you been navigating? It's especially when it's a little bit unknown. Like
Yeah.
there's some knowns, but then there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
So how's that been just on your faith journey?
Yeah. I think this time has definitely been challenging. I've moved a few times from Michigan to Las Vegas and then Las Vegas to New York. And every time that I moved, I was really like, hey, I'm ready to get out of here. Like this season in this place is done. And with New York, it's a bit bittersweet.
Yeah.
Because life is great here and it's really full here. And I think it's that note of like having the faith to trust God and the expectation that He has more, even though like
So
there's
good.
so much here, there's still so much more ahead.
Yeah.
And so I found myself balancing between stewarding the present but
Yeah.
preparing for the future.
That's so good.
And so just trying to do that as as best as I can and to be as present as I can too
Yeah.
to really like slow down and
Yeah.
to spend time to invest in the things that are steady
Right.
that are like grounding like relationships
Yeah.
family and friendship and not feeling like I have to do everything
Yeah.
before I
That's great.
leave or whatever it might
Exactly.
be.
And talk a little bit about too, Beth, and I think this is a big part of transition
Yeah.
is finishing well, is
Yeah.
leaving well.
That's
Yeah.
I
great.
think that a lot of people get to the end of a season, and well, one of the things that's beautiful, and I think people sometimes we can underestimate this. Once we are in a transition, we know something else is next.
Yeah.
It's hard not to live on a finishing the race, like, oh, if I can just get to the finish line,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
kind of have this finish line,
Yeah.
and it helps prepare us. That's the beautiful part of like a finish line, a transition. It prepares you, and it starts to make you tired.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I think that that's natural
Yeah,
and
that's
good.
good.
Like you start to
Yeah.
get tired. You're like, okay, yeah, like God helps you kind of go like, oh yeah, I am ready.
Yeah.
I do want to get to something
Yeah.
else, something new. But
Yeah.
how can you finish well? Because I
That's
think
good.
some of us go, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'm out of here. I'm
Yeah.
leaving. Like this is done. Like what can I do
Mhm.
to finish well? I think
Yeah.
you do a great job at that.
Yeah. Thank you
I
so
think you have been.
much.
Yeah. You're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you got 2 weeks left. So
Mhm. Yeah,
how has it been so
definitely.
far?
Well, I think that you've said this before throughout our friendship, but that people are in your life for a season, a reason, and a lifetime.
That's so
Yeah.
good.
And I think that when you think about uh, leaving something, you have to remember that like what you're leaving could still be with you for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it's like very important to honor and like protect like those relationships that you're gonna carry with you,
Yeah.
And then I think it's okay that some of this stuff is like, hey, yeah, like that doesn't need as much of my attention right now because
Yeah.
it is just here. It was just a season. But just to
Right.
remember that like just because you're letting go and moving on, like you're not letting go of everything.
Yeah.
There's stuff that you're gonna carry with you. And I think that obviously we know like through the kingdom of God that the only
That's it.
thing that we can carry with us is relationships. And
That's it.
so the most important thing is to remember not to bulldoze like those relationships
Great. Yeah.
just because you're so focused on like what's ahead and
Yeah.
to again just like to slow down and to be in the moment
Yeah.
as much as you can.
That's
Yeah.
really good. Yeah. You want to add anything to it, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think I'm actually gonna go the opposite way of Beth because in the sense of like, I think that I grew up a lot of like holding relationships very near and dear
Yeah.
to the point that like if there was someone that I might have known for like 10 years and I felt the grieving of that relationship ending, I would want to hold on to it so badly because of what it's done for me in my lifetime. And I think that was like something that God revealed to me about 4 years ago is like it's selfish to not let certain people go in your
That's
life
great.
when it's time for them to leave. And
Yeah.
I think that in the season
That's
in
great.
which I was at my time is like I was transitioning from a season of relationship expansion. I think because I grew up in the DMV for a very long time, which is DC, Maryland, Virginia, for anyone that's not familiar. I grew up in an area where it's like everybody only knows what they know around them.
Yeah.
And I think that God was calling me to a season where He was like, I have more for you.
Yeah.
And I want you to just be more open to what more I have for you in relationships, more like minded people, more people that can pour into you. And I remember my prayer specifically, I was asking God to provide me with a space in a church, which happens to be Trinity, that I could be poured in and
Yeah.
I could find relationship. And Beth was actually the first person that took me to lunch when I
Come
moved to
on.
New York. And
fun.
I just felt, and even in our lunch, is like God was sending me on a new path for
Yeah.
new relationships.
Yeah.
And so for me specifically, I think um, that transition out was letting go of like, I was more so removing,
Yeah.
like adding space for God to add more oil
That's
into
really
my
good.
jar.
That's great.
And I think when I was able to do that and release that, He
Yeah.
literally sent so many people more than I could
Yeah.
have ever asked or imagined.
Yeah,
So
So,
good.
yeah.
that's great.
All right, so take a moment and
Yeah.
answer just what is the most valuable lesson you've learned in transition thus far?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say if I reflect back on something that carried me through seasons of transitions in the past, it's that life can get really full and your cup can get really full with relationships, with work, with the city that you live in, family, friends, whatever it might be. And I think that transition has offered me an opportunity to empty out the cup completely,
Great.
like
Yeah.
just to empty it and to ask God, like, what is it that you'd have me put back in the cup? And like, obviously, some of those things are gonna go back in, but I think that it helps to create
It's really
space
good.
for
Yeah.
what it is that God has for you next.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture. I love that.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway for me, because I've had a lot of different transitions in my lifetime, but I think the season that specifically I spoke about earlier is I've noticed that there's a pattern of grace that I need to give myself.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times when we go into these new spaces, is like we have an expectation, whether it's unsaid or maybe it's something we kind of figured in our mind. But God's word always talks about be still and know that I am God. And I think that that has been the main thing that has carried
Yeah.
me through, is because things in transition are always going to happen in like layers. So
Mm.
it's like you'll have that grieving process, but then you'll have the moment of joy
Yeah.
and you'll be enjoying the season, but then
Yeah.
something's going to shift a little
Yeah.
and you might find yourself back at that moment of
Yeah.
like, wow, I'm still grieving this one thing. And so in that season of grief and as you go and you transition, I would say to anyone that is transitioning or planning to transition is give yourself grace and
Yeah.
pray
Right.
a lot. Pray for God to replace your anxiousness for joy and to replace your worries for just peace. Because I think that there's going to be multitudes of layering that's going to unfold,
Yeah.
that's going to require a little bit of grace that's extra than the last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. So good. I think I'd share, just for me, valuable lesson is that I hate transition. Does that count? Is that
Yeah.
good? Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hard, and it's even the fun ones
Yeah.
are really hard.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
real.
And everything changes. And if you're anything like me, it's like I don't want everything to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And I think what I've had to do is understand that every transition and every pain in the transition, the difficulty felt, has been developing me for what's next.
That's great.
Yeah.
Right? So
That's
that
great.
it's like this, like pregnancy for me, it's a transition.
Yeah.
Right? And thank God. Actually,
Yeah.
I think it's actually a beautiful picture of God's plan for transition in our
Yeah.
life.
That's
I want to
great.
have a baby. Great. You get pregnant. Well, it's not like you have a baby the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
gotta
so
go
good.
9 full
Month.
freaking months. 4 different times. And then you deliver. And
Yeah,
then,
that's
there's
so
something on the other side. And then when you deliver, it's not like, oh, we're done. It's like, oh, wow, there's a lot more to carry.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that's required of me in this
Yeah.
season. And so
Yeah.
it's this
That's so good.
stretching, it's this, discomfort, but it's also God's way of preparing me for that new season.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, I don't know, embrace the transition, embrace that
Yeah.
it's hard. Don't pretend that it's not.
Yeah,
Have
great.
joy through it.
Yeah.
Maybe some are just, you're feeling a lot
Yeah.
of joy. Like, lean into the
Yeah.
joy, and I love
Cry
the
a little
Bible.
bit too.
Yeah, cry a little bit.
Yeah,
Like,
it's okay to cry.
but one thing I would say is don't distance yourself.
Yeah,
that's
Don't
great.
distance yourself.
really
That's
good
really
advice.
God has given you people, resources around
Yeah.
you to kind of to like push you forward into what's
Yeah.
next, and so just stay leaned in to the Lord. And
Yeah.
so that would be our valuable lesson for you, whatever transition you're dealing with today,
Mhm.
whether it's a new mom or you're getting married or
Yeah.
you're moving or a new career, a new job. I don't know what it is for you, but let us just encourage you today that God is with you.
Yeah.
And He wants to walk with you through
Yeah.
this season of transition.
So-
And thanks for watching. If you liked what you heard, share with a friend. Maybe save it to listen to later when you're in another transition season. You'll probably need it again. But yeah, we'll see you soon, Church Girl.